Have you ever wondered how one book, the Bible, can lead to two completely different ideas about the future? One person talks about a secret rapture, a 7-year tribulation, and then someone else reads the same book and sees something totally different. Well, today we're going to dig into exactly why that happens.
All right, so let's get right into it. How can really sincere, smart people look at the exact same words on a page and come up with these future timelines that feel like they're from, different planets? Is it just that somebody's wrong, or if there's something deeper going on?
Well, here's the secret. The answer usually isn't about fighting over one single verse. Nope. The real difference, it comes down to the lens you're using. It's the whole framework, the set of glasses you put on before you even start reading page 1. And those starting assumptions, they shape absolutely everything else.
So let's break down the first of these big lenses. We're going to call it the two-track story. Its official name is Dispensationalism. And trust me, if you've ever seen one of those complicated end times charts or a lot of popular movies about the future, you've already seen this framework in action. This whole way of thinking was really made popular by guys like C.I. Scofield. And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute core of it all. The central idea is this. God has two completely separate peoples. You've got ethnic Israel on one hand and the church on the other. And in this view, they are fundamentally totally distinct. So the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. According to dispensationalism, God has a unique program, a unique set of promises just for Israel, and then a totally separate plan with a different set of promises just for the church. Think of it like two programs running at the same time, but they never ever mix. The best way to picture this is to think of two parallel train tracks, okay? On one track, you've got the story of Israel, and it's all about literal earthly promises. We're talking physical land, a real kingdom on earth. Then on the other track, running right alongside it, you have the church, and its promises are all heavenly. So they run side by side through all of history, but they're headed to different destinations. They never, ever merge into one. All right, now let's switch gears and look at the second lens, which, as you're about to see, paints a completely different picture. We're calling this one the one-story epic, but the more formal name for it is covenant theology.
And yeah, you can see right away how different this is. Forget the parallel tracks. This view says there's just one people of God. There's just one story. It's a single, unfolding plan of redemption from Genesis all the way to the end.
So what covenant theology is really arguing is that the entire Bible is telling one single, coherent story. Now that story is structured through a series of covenants. You can think of them as these big agreements. But, and this is key, they aren't separate plans. It's more like each covenant is a new chapter in the same book, building on the last one and pushing the one single plot line forward. And this is a great way to see that flow in action. The story kicks off with a promise made way back with Abraham. Then, the next chapter, through Moses, adds more detail with the law. Then you get another chapter, the kingdom, through David. But here's the thing. All of these chapters are pointing toward the grand finale, the climax of the whole story, and that's Jesus Christ, who comes and fulfills all the earlier promises and unites everyone, Jews and Gentiles who believe, into one single new family.
Okay, let's just pause here for a second and look at this side by side. It really helps. With dispensationalism, you've got that multi-track model, right? Israel and the church, totally separate. And that almost always leads to what's called a futurist view of the end times, meaning the biggest prophecies are still waiting to happen in our future. But then you look at covenant theology. It's one unified story where the church is seen as the fulfillment of Israel. And this leads to a view that's often called preterist, which is just a fancy word from Latin meaning past. It means that many of those key prophecies were actually fulfilled way back in the 1st century.
Okay, so theory is one thing, but how do these lenses actually work when you apply them to a real Bible passage? Let's do a little case study. We'll start with one of the most foundational promises in the whole book, the one God made to Abraham in Genesis.
All right, so if you put on the lens 1, the dispensational view, that promise about land and descendants for Abraham, well, it's like an ironclad, unconditional property deed for ethnic Israel. The logic goes like this. God's promises have to be fulfilled literally, right? And since Israel as a nation has never actually possessed all that land, well then that promise must still be waiting to be fulfilled in the future in some restored earthly kingdom. But now, switch to lens 2, the covenantal view. That exact same promise is seen totally differently. It's seen as the starting point for God's grand plan to save people from every nation, and it's fulfilled spiritually in Christ and his global family, the church.
So you might be asking, where does the covenantal view get that interpretation from? Well, proponents will point you straight to the New Testament, especially the book of Galatians. It makes a really specific argument that the original promise to Abraham talked about his seed in the singular, as in one person, not seeds plural. And if that's the case, they argue, then the ultimate fulfillment isn't a whole nation of people, it's one specific person, Christ himself. And that means anyone who is in Christ is an heir to that very same promise.
Okay, now for the big one. End times timelines. This is where the differences between these two lenses just explode. And we're going to look at one of the most debated prophecies of all time, the 70 weeks from the book of Daniel.
So looking through that dispensational lens, this prophecy is treated like a very strict timeline. Take a look at this. The first 69 weeks, which are understood as weeks of years, they unfold right on schedule, from the decree in 445 BC all the way to Christ's death. But then, and this is the most important part of this view, the prophetic clock just stops. You see that huge space there? That's the church age. A massive gap gets inserted into the timeline. And that final 70th week, it gets punted way, way down the road into our future, becoming a 7-year tribulation.
Okay, now let's look at the exact same prophecy, but through the covenantal lens. What's the first thing you notice? The gap. It's gone. In this view, the timeline just keeps on running, continuously. The 70 weeks start, the Messiah is cut off right on schedule, and that final week, it's seen as describing the time when the new covenant was established, which all wrapped up with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. It's a textbook preterist reading, arguing the whole prophecy already happened. It's fulfilled history.
And a key piece of evidence for this historical view comes from Jesus himself. When Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation, that key phrase from Daniel's prophecy, he looks at the people standing right there in front of him, his own generation, and tells them they are the ones who are going to see it happen. So for someone holding this view, trying to make that prophecy jump thousands of years into the future becomes, well, a pretty difficult fit.
So, as we start to wrap this all up, I think you can see just how powerful a framework can be, right? The conclusions we end up with, so often, they're already baked right into the assumptions we start out with.
And that really brings us right back to where we started, to that central conflict. Is the story of the Bible a two-track program for two different peoples, Israel and the church, with two totally separate destinies, or is it one single, unified epic? A drama that finds its climax when all of God's people are brought together into one new family through Christ.
When it comes down to it, the conclusion you draw about the future, it isn't really decided by arguing over a single verse here or there. It's almost entirely determined by which of these two big, foundational lenses, which of these two ways of reading the whole story you put on from the very beginning.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. Because really, this isn't just about theology, is it? We all have these unseen frameworks, these assumptions, these lenses that shape how we interpret everything in our lives, from the news we read to the way we see each other. And so maybe the most important question of all is simply this: are we even aware of the lenses we're looking through?